Hey, everybody, it's time for Security Now in a special episode. Folks, this is one you're going to want to download and keep. You're going to want to get the show notes to Steve Gibson. We'll talk a little bit about some new stuff in Firefox and so forth, but the bulk of this show is about Steve's research on file syncing. Something more secure, more private than Dropbox or Google Drive or OneCloud Drive or any of those. Steve says he's found the answer. The joy of sync is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 734, recorded September 14th for airing October 1st, 2019. The joy of sync. Security Now is brought to you by Freshbooks, the #1 accounting software in the cloud for self-employed professionals and their teams. Make the running of your business easier and more efficient with FreshBooks. Try it free for 30 days at freshbooks.com/securitynow. And by Cashfly. Give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with Cashfly CDN and be 30% faster than the competition. Learn more at securitynow.cashfly.com. And by LastPass, a personal password manager and identity solution for businesses all in one. You only need one master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your security and privacy, and today, data synchronization with this guy here, Steve Gibson of GRC.com. Hi, Steve.
Leo, great to be with you once again for, in this case, we're sneaking in an early record. So we do not have lots of security news because while we're recording this, I have no idea what has been going on recently. However, I do promise that the next podcast, 735, is going to be a big mega catch-up, and we will catch everybody up on anything that happened while Laura and I were traveling around Europe, meeting with OWASP groups and telling them about Squirrel, which is actually where I will be on October 1st, which is nominally the date of this podcast. And, of course, you and I are going to be 2 days later on Thursday in Boston for the Log Me In LastPass identity over the internet.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to that panel. And I think it's probably too late to get tickets to that now, but just in case, if you want to see if there's any tickets left, twit.to/unlocked is the short URL. It is this Thursday. You need to be in Boston at Thursday, 3:45 p.m. At the Intercontinental Hotel. Steve and I and Bill Cheswick and Jerry Buchholz, who is the CISO for Log Me In, will be talking about the problem with passwords. And I suspect we'll get a little squirrel in there.
I think maybe we will, and we will definitely. Apparently, there will be sort of a cocktail.
There's a reception afterwards. So we're going to be on stage for about an hour and a half. We'll take questions for half an hour, so an hour of us talking, half an hour of questions, and then we'll be around for an hour or so after that to talk individually with people. That's going to be, I think, the highlight of it. I can't wait.
Very fun. I really enjoyed that when I did the OWASP Orange County group. It was basically a room full of Security Now listeners. So it was, we had a lot of fun. We also had people bringing their SpinRite CDs for autographs. So I autographed a lot of SpinRite CDs.
Bring your SpinRite CDs, kids.
Nice. Lori said, people still use CDs. I said, well, it's not easy to autograph a thumb drive. There's just not really enough room there. They
are an excellent substrate for a Sharpie. They really do quite a bit. So this week we wanted to do something that was a little more evergreen because we are recording it a couple of weeks ahead of time. But this is a project you've been working on for some time.
For several months now. So this week's podcast we titled "The Joy of Sync." And I talked about this a couple months ago, where I was struggling with operating in two different physical locations. I've maintained where I'm podcasting from. Everybody knows that hasn't changed in 15 years. It's the way it always has been. But I'm now spending my evenings in a different location with Lori, and we normally both. She's busy in the evening, and so I get another burst of opportunity to work. So I was copying stuff onto a thumb drive and using SneakerNet, even in this day and age, or like sticking things in a Dropbox folder and then bringing them down. But basically, I didn't have automation for keeping things dynamically synchronized. And so I decided finally, okay, this is crazy. Like, let's use some technology here, Gibson, and figure out what we should do. And so you and I talked about this briefly about OwnCloud, and you pointed me at Nextcloud, and I had sort of settled on Dropbox, but I was uncomfortable with the fact that it wasn't encrypted storage. I mean, it's encrypted at Dropbox, and it's encrypted in transit. But if you read the fine print in the terms of service, it says that they're able to look at your files to verify that it doesn't violate their terms of service. And the other cloud providers do the same thing. So we're going to get to all that, and also to the solution that I have found. I have something that actually two different tools and a trick for using one of them that I am really happy with. It's completely solved my problem. It's TNO, which of course, in fact, it was for cloud storage back in the Jungle Disk days that we coined that term, that acronym.
Oh, really? I
TNO.
didn't realize that. Okay.
That's what it was. It was trust no one. The idea being to encrypt it on your machine before it leaves. And of course, that creates some challenges, because one of the things that many of our listeners have said they want the ability to do is to selectively share specific files with other people. But if everything that's stored in the cloud is encrypted, then how are you able to offer, like, selectively let people have specific things? And then, of course, there are people who don't have an interest in cloud stuff, but they still want to do inter-device synchronization. Anyway, I have two tools that completely offer solutions to all of that. Anyway, so we're going to talk about that, but I do want to, because this is still security now, take a look at some of Mozilla's recently announced plans to gradually and carefully bring DNS over HTTPS to all Firefox users in the US. It turns out that it's not quite the slam dunk that we might imagine. And I also want to check in with the EFF to see what they think about this. And then also remind our listeners about the 100% free VPN offering coming from our friends at Cloudflare. So do a little bit of Security Now business, and then we're going to plow into how you achieve the joy of sync.
The joy of sync. And, of course, we have a picture of the week, because you wouldn't go a week without a picture. That's
we can't.
First, a word from our sponsor. We'll be back with more of Steve Gibson and his sync story and all the tech news in just a second. But first, a word from our sponsor, Freshbooks. Love the Freshbooks. First started using them years ago when I was going to Canada to do a call for help in Canada. And I used to have to invoice Rogers, the company that produced the show. I used to have to send them expenses, too, bill them for my hotel and my food and all that. And it was such a pain. Fire up Word, fire up Excel, do the currency conversion. So I'd always have to look up what the Canadian dollar was worth that week. And, man, I got to the point where I just stopped doing it, which is dumb. That was lesson number one. You don't invoice people, they don't pay you. Oops. Then I complained to Amber about it one day, and she said, Leo, you're not using FreshBooks? I said, what's FreshBooks? She said, well, come on, Leo. It's the easiest way to make invoices in Canadian dollars or any currency. In fact, FreshBooks is used by over, I think it's 5 million people in 120 countries all over the world. Well, now, I couldn't resist. I tried it, and then I was sold immediately. It changed my life. It made it much easier. I billed easier. By the way, the interesting thing about using FreshBooks for your invoices is you get paid faster, too. On average, 5 days faster. And the reason is there's a little Pay Leo button. Well, it doesn't say Pay Leo on your invoice, but it did on mine. Pay Leo button, because you can take online payments. The minute you sign up for FreshBooks, you can take online payments. So it turns out your client doesn't like paying bills any more than you like sending bills. But if you make it easy for them, just press a button, they'll do it. So you get paid faster. FreshBooks also, this is the other thing, this is the secret that I learned that really changed my life. Basically, because FreshBooks does your accounts receivable, that's the invoices, does your expense reports, knows your expenses. See, it knows your income, your expenses. It's doing your accounting automatically. It knows what you've been paid, what you're owed, what you've spent. And every day you can look at your FreshBooks dashboard and say, oh, I'm in profit today, or I'm losing money, I better do better. That is an amazing thing. When I was a small business owner, I hardly knew whether we were making money. I don't know where we're making money right now. But with FreshBooks, I always did. And that was really, really cool. FreshBooks has a great app, too. It makes it very easy to capture those expenses. You just take a picture of the receipt. But it does more than that. You can respond to clients from wherever you are. You'll see updates. You'll know which invoices haven't been paid. You can even make invoices on the mobile app. If you have a team, if you're not a solo guy, you've got people working with you, it lets you collaborate with your team on FreshBooks. You can utilize specific team members, assign them to a manager role, which means your second in command can manage projects, billing. Let them do more of the work. Just all in one tool. If you're keeping track of hours of time spent on a project, that does that too. There's a button on the website. Their app has a button. It'll automatically go into the invoices. FreshBooks is awesome. And they have, if you have any questions, really great support team. Via phone, email, or live chat, they will give you a quick response to any question you've got. Make it easier to run your business. Make it more efficient. Spend more of the time doing what you love and less time doing your books with FreshBooks. Visit freshbooks.com/securitynow. And if you enter Security Now in the How Did You Hear About Us section, you'll get 30 days free right now. Don't put it off. freshbooks.com/securitynow. Use Security Now to get 30 days free in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Thank you, FreshBooks, for your support. Thank you, Security Now listener, for helping us by using FreshBooks. Now back to Steve. All right, Steve, let's, actually, should we do the picture of the week before we get syncing?
I think we should. And this is a little gruesome, actually, when you look at the second half of the picture. But it's been in my archive of photos for a while, so I thought it would be sort of fun. This is the CAPTCHA, the I'm not a robot. And the upper half of the picture says, "Are you a robot?" And it shows a human finger touching the I'm not a robot checkbox to assert that fact. And then the gruesome part is the second half of the picture where we encounter that disturbingly lifelike Boston Dynamics robot holding, unfortunately, a severed human hand, and in its other hand, the phone showing that the checkbox of "I'm not a robot" has been checked.
Of course, it isn't a fingerprint, so this doesn't really
doesn't quite capture that.
Sometime I would love to spend some time on this "I'm not a robot" reCAPTCHA, because I understand how it works, but sometimes you click it and it goes, okay, you're not, I believe you. And sometimes you have to look at road signs for hours. And it's an interesting thing that Google's doing with this. And so at some point, it'd be kind of fun to talk about that.
It uses basically a deep reputation network in order to see if it knows your browser, if it knows your IP, if Google's watching us, and so
it knows who you are.
It's even like, what have you been doing recently before you claim not to be a robot, or does this suddenly just come out of nowhere by surprise?
Which shows, ironically, that a robot could click it as long as it had your phone that you'd been using up to the point where it ripped your head off.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I did want to talk a little bit. We've been talking recently about DNS over HTTPS. A month or two ago, we talked about the setting that was not yet the default for Firefox, which Mozilla is beginning to experiment with. Because I remember that the default provider, the idea, of course, is that rather than sending DNS queries out over UDP to your regularly scheduled DNS provider, which is more often than not your ISP, people's home routers will use DHCP to obtain not only an IP address for a public IP for itself, but also the IPs of your local ISP. The idea being that DNS servers that are near you are going to be the fastest to respond. DNS servers are caching, so if anybody in your area had looked up any of the same sites that you go to, and if you look at the distribution, lots of people are going to Google, lots are going to Facebook.com, and so forth, then it's very often the case that if your computer doesn't already know where the IP address for www.facebook.com, that very short distance away your ISP's DNS server will. So anyway, of course, the problem with that is that UDP and DNS are unencrypted by default, and that represents a privacy concern for people. So what Firefox has been experimenting with is bringing up an HTTPS tunnel so that all of your web browser's DNS queries, instead of going to that local ISP, will go to a DNS server at the other end of the tunnel, which at this point by default is Cloudflare, because they offer as it's called, a DOH, DNS over HTTPS service.
Unless you do your own, but no, I don't do my own. I use Cloudflare. You're basically sending all that traffic to Cloudflare, and I think they're doing it for a reason. They want to know all that stuff, right?
They really do seem to be good guys.
I don't think they're selling it, but I think they're probably using it to make their service better, that kind of thing.
They may be. I doubt that they're monetizing. I would be very surprised if they were. So what was interesting, and because there is more technical depth to this, is I picked up on a blog posting by Selena Deckelman, who's Mozilla's Senior Director of Firefox Engineering. She had some very interesting details about their experiments that I knew our listeners would find fascinating. Her blog posting was from September 6th. What's next in making encrypted DNS over HTTPS the default? So she said, in 2017, Mozilla began working on the DNS over HTTPS protocol. And since June of 2018, we've been running experiments in Firefox to ensure the performance and user experience are great. She said, we've also been surprised and excited by the more than 70,000 users who have already chosen on their own to explicitly enable DOH in Firefox Release Edition. And, we probably contributed in some small measure to that, because we talked a few months ago about where to go, what to flip, and there is a UI panel now in Firefox. You don't have to dig into that about:config thing. It's just like right there. And when you turn it on, your DNS queries are for your browser, not for your system as a whole, because this is just browser centric. They're all going to be encrypted. And I think there is a client for pfSense and other routers, which would allow then your entire network to have its DNS handled through DOH. Anyway, so she said, we are close to releasing DOH in the US, and we have a few updates to share. She wrote, after many experiments, we've demonstrated that we have a reliable service whose performance is good, that we can detect and mitigate key deployment problems. And that's interesting because there are some. And that most of our users will benefit from the greater protections of encrypted DNS traffic. We feel confident that enabling DOH by default is the right next step. When DOH is enabled, users will be notified and given the opportunity to opt out. So, of course, this is huge, right? They're talking about flipping the default to DOH, meaning that, as we know, my favorite term is one of them, the tyranny of the default, meaning that's the default setting is what almost everybody ends up using. So she said, this post includes results of our latest experiment, configuration recommendations for systems administrators and parental controls providers, and our plans for enabling DOH for some users in the U.S. Our latest DOH experiment was designed to help us determine how we could deploy DOH, honor enterprise configuration, and respect user choice about parental controls. And of course, what that means is that filtering DNS is one of the ways you can keep your family away from bad websites, where bad can be, selectively or deliberately or, to some degree controlled. Like what class of sites do you not want people to get to? And on the enterprise side, there are collisions with, for example, enterprise DNS might define non-public domains which are of use to the enterprise. But if you tunnel DNS outside, then public DNS servers won't know about the enterprise private DNS. So she said we had a few key learnings from the experiment, as she put it, and there were two she cited. First, we found that OpenDNS's parental controls and Google's Safe Search feature were rarely configured by Firefox users in the U.S. In total, 4.3% of users in the study used OpenDNS's parental controls or Safe Search. Surprisingly, there was little overlap between users of Safe Search and OpenDNS parental controls. As a result, we're reaching out to parental controls operators to find out more about why this might be happening. Then she also said, we found 9.2% of users triggered one of our split horizon heuristics. Because so a split horizon means that you intelligently fall back to a different DNS server based on some heuristics, based on some rules of thumb, where so they were recognizing that there would be a problem if everybody was tunneled without exception. So she said the heuristics were triggered in two situations: when websites were accessed whose domains had non-public suffixes, not prefixes, but suffixes, right? So like some non-public TLD, top-level domain, like maybe, .ibm or something, for example. And she said, and when domain lookups returned both public and private IP addresses, so the so-called RFC 1918 IP ranges, like 192.168. So she said there was also little overlap between users of our split horizon heuristics, with only 1% of clients triggering both. She said, now that we have these results, we want to tell you about the approach we have settled on to address managed networks and parental controls. At the high level, our plan is to respect user choice for opt-in parental controls and disable DOH if we detect them. So that is to say, if you are using for example, open DNS that has where you're taking advantage of their parental controls, they will not tunnel. Firefox will not tunnel in that instance.
That's smart. That's good.
Yeah. Yes. And she said, also respect enterprise configuration and disable DOH unless explicitly enabled by enterprise configuration, and fall back to operating system defaults for DNS when split horizon configuration or other DNS issues cause lookup failures. So, for example, if they're tunneling and you do ask for johnsmith.mycomputer.ibm, well, that's going to fail because IBM is not a TLD. So they will detect that and go, whoops, this is a configuration where something special has been done for this user's DNS. So then they will back off and disable DNS over HTTPS. So essentially what that means is that what they found was that it was a very small percentage of Firefox users who would need that, and that but by enabling it by default, they will intelligently back off if they encounter that. But by and large, the huge majority of users won't ever see a problem and will get the benefit of having their browser's DNS queries tunneled to Cloudflare or wherever. And of course, as you noted, Leo, one of the concerns is that in very much in the same way that a VPN has the effect of concentrating all of your traffic out to a single point. Of course, as you noted, if whoever it is you choose as your DOH provider is seeing all of your DNS lookups. So it has that same sort of concentration effect. On the other hand, many people are more concerned about what their own local ISP is doing with, having advantage of their DNS lookups. Like, for example, if you it's considered controversial that you mistype a domain name and you get your, like in my case, your local Cox cable intercept page saying, oh, well, here's some things to consider. I mean, they take it as a marketing opportunity. Anyway, so her post continues, we're planning to deploy DOH in fallback mode. That is, if domain name lookups using DOH fail, or if our heuristics are triggered, Firefox will fall back and use the default operating system DNS. This means that for the minority of users whose DNS lookups might fail because of split horizon configuration, Firefox will attempt to find the correct address through the operating system DNS. In addition, she said, Firefox already detects that parental controls are enabled in the operating system, and if they are in effect, Firefox will disable DOH. Similarly, Firefox will detect whether enterprise policies have been set on the device and will disable DOH in those circumstances. If an enterprise policy explicitly enables DOH, which we think would be awesome, she writes, we will also respect that. If you're a system administrator interested in how to configure enterprise policies, please find documentation here. And she provided a link, and I have a link to her posting in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow up. She said, if you find any bugs, please report them here, and another link. So this was interesting too. She said, under options for providers of parental controls, she said, we're also working with providers of parental controls, including ISPs, to add, I thought this was very clever, a canary domain to their block lists. This helps us in situations where the parental controls operate on the network rather than an individual computer. If Firefox determines that our canary domain is blocked, this will indicate that opt-in parental controls are in effect on the network, and Firefox will disable DOH automatically. If you are a provider of parental controls, details are available here, and she provided a link. Please reach out to us for more information at DOH-canary-domain@mozilla.com, so by email. We're also interested in connecting with commercial block list providers in the U.S. and internationally. This canary domain is intended for use in cases where users have opted in to parental controls. We plan to revisit the use of this heuristic over time, and we'll be paying close attention to how the canary domain is adopted. If we find that it is being abused to disable DOH in situations where users have not explicitly opted in, we will revisit our approach. And then she concluded saying, under plans for enabling DOH protections by default, she said, we plan to gradually roll out DOH in the U.S. starting in late September. Our plan is to start slowly enabling DOH for a small percentage of users while monitoring for any issues before enabling it for a larger audience. If this goes well, we will let you know when we're ready for 100% deployment. For the moment, we encourage enterprise administrators and parental control providers to check out our config documentation and get in touch with any questions. So anyway, I think this is great. As we noted, and as we know, most users, even Firefox users, just sort of say, okay, I know that Firefox is doing the right thing. It's not monetizing what I do. It's protecting my privacy more so than more popular browsers. So I'm just going to leave it set the way it is. There are things one can do to increase that, and eventually all of your DNS lookups will get tunneled. And, you of course, you can turn that off if you'd rather have a more dispersed DNS querying, although I can't imagine trusting anyone more than Cloudflare. I mean, they're good guys.
Yeah.
And I was curious about the EFF weighing in. They recently posted, encrypted DNS could help close the biggest privacy gap on the internet. And they said, why are some groups fighting against it? I thought this was interesting. She said, they wrote, thanks to the success of projects like Let's Encrypt, which of course we know the EFF was big behind, and it has succeeded at their goal of providing free encryption for sites that weren't otherwise encrypted, with the recognition that, of course, it's domain level encryption, not organization validation, and not extended validation, just domain level encryption. But it means that traffic is no longer, to a great degree, traveling over the net unencrypted. And the EFF wrote also, thanks to the success of recent UX changes in the browsers, most page loads are now encrypted with TLS. They wrote, but DNS, the system that looks up a site's IP address when you type the site's name into your browser, remains unprotected by encryption. Because of this, anyone along the path from your network to your DNS resolver, where domain names are converted to IP addresses, can collect information about which sites you visit. This means that certain eavesdroppers can still profile your online activity by making a list of sites you visit, or a list of who visits a particular site. Malicious DNS resolvers or on-path routers can also tamper, they note, with your DNS request, blocking you from accessing sites or even routing you to fake versions of the sites you requested. A team of engineers is working to fix these problems with DNS-over-HTTPS, a draft technology under development through the IETF that has been championed by Mozilla. DNS over HTTPS prevents on-path eavesdropping, spoofing, and blocking of encrypting or blocking by encrypting your DNS requests with TLS. Alongside technologies like TLS 1.3 and encrypted SNI, that's server name indication, which is, well, that was one of the last things that needed to get fixed, which TLS 1.3 does, because in that initial, even on a secure connection, and even if DNS were encrypted, the browser now indicates what site it wants to connect to, so that a multi-hosted server is able to select the proper security certificate for the connection. So that was one remaining privacy leakage, which is resolved in TLS 1.3. So they say DOH has the potential to provide tremendous privacy protections. But many internet service providers and participants in the standardization process have expressed strong concerns about the development of the protocol. And of course, we covered this, and they remind us, the UK Internet Service Providers Association even went so far as to call Mozilla an internet villain for its role in developing DOH. Of course, they later backtracked on that, saying, whoops, we didn't realize that was going to be such a mistake. So EFF says ISPs are concerned that DOH will complicate the use of captive portals, which are used to intercept connections briefly to force users to log into a network, and will make it more difficult to block content at the resolver level. DNS over HTTPS may undermine plans in the UK to block access to online pornography. They said, the block, introduced as part of the Digital Economy Act of 2017, was planned to be implemented through DNS. They say members of civil society have also expressed concerns over plans for browsers to automatically use specific DNS resolvers, overriding the resolver configured by the operating system, which today is most often the one suggested by the ISP. This would contribute to the centralization of internet infrastructure, as thousands of DNS resolvers used for web requests would be replaced by a small handful. True. That centralization would increase the power of the DNS resolver operators chosen by the browser vendors. Also true. That's a good point, yeah. which would make it possible for those resolver operators to censor or monitor browser users' online activity. This capability prompted Mozilla to push for strong policies that forbid this kind of censorship and monitoring. Well, and think about it. I mean, if Mozilla chooses you, as they chose Cloudflare, then in return, Mozilla can say, hey, Cloudflare, we'd like to, promote you and implicitly your service, but you got to promise in return no funny business. And of course, Mozilla has a lot of clout, because who they aim their all of their browsers at is entirely their choice, with the exception of users who manually override. But as we know, that's going to be vanishingly small percentage. So the EFF says the merits of trusting different entities for this purpose are complicated, and different users might have reasons to make different choices. But to avoid having this technology deployment produce such a powerful centralizing effect, EFF is calling for widespread deployment of DNS over HTTPS support by internet service providers themselves. In other words, let's bring up a bunch of services, like OpenDNS and Google and others, so that users will have more choice. And you could imagine an easy to use, list where you choose, or maybe even rotate them. It doesn't always have to be the same one, right? So there's no reason you couldn't bring up a couple tunnels and just hand out queries in a round robin fashion to a spread of so you sort of have a spread spectrum DOH.
That's clever. What a good idea. Yeah.
So they say this will allow the security and privacy benefits of the technology to be realized while giving users the option to continue to use the huge variety of ISP-provided resolvers that they typically use now. And they said several privacy-friendly ISPs have already answered the call. They said, we spoke with Marek Ilsky, Chief Technology Officer at UK-based ISP Felix, F-A-E-L-I-X, to discuss their plans around encrypted DNS. Felix has implemented support for DNS over HTTPS on their pdns.felix.net resolver. They weren't motivated by concerns about government surveillance, Marek says, but by, quote, the monetization of our personal data, unquote, which is to say they want to work against it. They wrote to Marek, supporting privacy-protecting technologies is a moral imperative. He said, he was quoted by the EFF, quote, I feel it is our calling as a privacy and tech-literate people to help others understand the rights that GDPR has brought to Europeans, he said, and to give people the tools they can use to take control of their privacy. So the EFF concludes, EFF is very excited about the privacy protections that DOH will bring, especially since many internet standards and infrastructure developers have pointed to unencrypted DNS queries as an excuse to delay turning on encryption elsewhere in the internet. But as with any fundamental shift in the infrastructure of the internet, DOH must be deployed in a way that respects the rights of the users. Browsers must be transparent about who will gain access to DNS request data and give users an opportunity to choose their own resolver. ISPs and other operators of public resolvers should implement support for encrypted DNS to help preserve a decentralized ecosystem in which users have more choices of whom they rely on for various services. They should also commit to data protections like the ones Mozilla has outlined in their trusted recursive resolver policy. With these steps, DNS over HTTPS has the potential to close one of the largest privacy gaps on the internet. So that's all for the best. Now, of course, this is all happy news, but we do need to remember that even though our communications are encrypted and now our DNS lookups would also be encrypted and hidden, the IP address to which we're communicating remains in the clear and fully visible. So none of this does anything about that. If you're on the wire, you're still seeing connections to IPs after they've been resolved by DNS. And it's true, you can't see into them, but there is that, technically metadata of who you are connecting to that continues to stand out. So I did want to remind our listeners, we talked about it at the time, but Cloudflare also has a project called Warp, which at this point that they've sort of followed their 1.1.1.1 DNS offering with a Warp client for mobile. At this point, it's iOS and Android only. There was a sign-up countdown where you could. I don't think it's widely deployed yet. I haven't checked back to see what the status is, but it was a 100% free for mobile VPN, which then would basically solve all of this and solve the IP monitoring problem, with the caveat that yes, all of your traffic is then being centralized. I mean, this was really the point that the EFF was making, was the power of the internet is its decentralization. So that's one of the downsides of any time you're creating a tunnel, is that you're at any tunnel, whether it's a DNS tunnel or a VPN tunnel, it's going to be inherently providing some centralization.
I don't know if you saw that Firefox is now offering a private network. It's in beta right now. Yeah. I'm using it right now. If you have a Firefox account, you install an extension and turn it on. And I was just looking, and it says I'm coming from 8.45.41.210, which is a level 3 domain, but I don't know anything else about it. It's not mine, obviously. So it's working as a VPN. Of course, it only works in the browser, but it seems to be pretty transparent and painless, and doesn't seem to be slowing things down much. So that's kind of cool too. I think we're making real progress, and a lot of credit to Firefox, I have to say, and Cloudflare for pushing this stuff forward. Yeah. Well, and I think we're rapidly approaching a point now with the way the internet's CDN and multi-homing structures have evolved. I mean, where if you use 1.1.1.1, you're actually going to a local resolver because
that's interesting.
Because you're not going to Cloudflare. Oh.
Well, you're going to their IP, but the way the resolution happens is you're being, it's all fancy, top level internet stuff, but they've got resolvers spread all over the world that answer that IP local to you through the whole.
That's why it's fast. That's great.
Yes, exactly.
Have you run it through your DNS benchmark? Have you checked its speed?
Yeah, it does pretty well.
Yeah,
it holds its own.
Can we take a little break, Steve, before we get to closing the loop? Because you're glitching, and I think we want to call you back. So, I don't know. Something weird's happening. Your screen's going green. It's a video thing, I think. It's just weird. But anyway, briefly, let's take a break, and we'll come back with more, including the joy of sync coming up next. Stay right here. We'll be right back with more of Steve and his sync solutions. But first, a word from Cashfly. Literally, this show and every show we do brought to you by Cashfly. Shouldn't your content be delivered to your customers seamlessly, quickly, without delay? Cashfly and their content delivery network are 30% faster than the competition, 10 times faster than the traditional delivery method you're probably using right now. I just love Cashfly, and they're going to save you money. Better and less expensive. Why aren't you using Cashfly? We've been Cashfly users for more than a decade now. Every show you download from our website, every show iTunes or any of the feed managers, the podcast clients download comes from Cashfly. That means no waiting, instant downloads. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you get a Twit podcast, you get it faster than anybody else because we're on Cashfly. We're not the only ones, by the way. LG uses Cashfly. Microsoft uses Cashfly. Yeah, Microsoft. Adobe uses Cashfly. Ars Technica uses it. And you know what? You don't have to worry about checking every day to figure out if you've exceeded your bandwidth cap. That's such a pain. Cashfly works with you and your usage to create a yearly billing cycle that eliminates those big spikes, smooths it all out, so you know exactly what you're paying month to month, year by year. You don't have to worry about exceeding any limits. I just think that's great. On average, customers who switch to Cashfly save 20%. By the way, Cashfly, because it's a CDN, has servers all over the world. That means faster delivery, but it also means a 100% SLA. It can't go down. That's why I love Cashfly. It's reliable, it's fast, it's affordable. You're going to love it too. Cashfly is giving away a complimentary detailed analysis of your current CDN bill. No pressure. No high sales tactics or anything. You give them your bill. They'll say, "Look, this is what we offered." They make you an offer, basically saying, "This is what you'd save." Don't you owe it to yourself to find out if you could save 20% or more by moving to Cashfly? Why not? No hard sell, just the information you need. Go to securitynow.cashfly.com. I'm a big fan. You've heard me say it. Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by Cashfly. CACHEFLY.com. Go to securitynow.cashfly.com. Thank you, Cashfly, for keeping the podcast rolling. And thank you for supporting Security Now by going to securitynow.cashfly.com. Back to you, Steve. We are back. Yes.
I have two tweets which sort of also double as our closing the loop feedback that takes us into our topic.
Oh, good.
Ashton, he said, "Hi, Steve. On the latest SN, you mentioned Boxcryptor Classic for transparent encryption of synchronized files. He says, I was using it for years, ever since you mentioned it on a previous SN episode, with great success. But the fact that they discontinued development on Classic never sat well with me. A couple of years ago, I found and moved to Cryptomator, which is open source donationware that does the same thing. It's cross-platform and has Android iOS apps, though those aren't free. Thought you might want to check it out. And that's Cryptomator, CRYPTOMATOR.org. And so I responding to Ashton, I agree completely. I said, first of all, Boxcryptor can still be used for free for TNO, Trust No One, cloud storage, with the limitations that it will only sync 2 devices and only with a single cloud provider. My big complaint with Boxcryptor is that they've switched to a software rental plan where it's no longer possible to purchase for any price a version that does not artificially constrained. Anything beyond 2 devices and a single cloud provider requires a subscription. And that's where I say no. So Cryptomator is really the logical inheritor of Boxcryptor. It runs on everything. It's open source and encrypts all file metadata so that the cloud sees nothing. It doesn't itself deal with synchronization, but relies on the cloud provider's folder and file sync. And when you essentially you mount an encrypted volume, which creates a virtual drive in your drive hierarchy, and then files that are there, you basically work with those. So while Cryptomator is not one of the 2 tools or services that I have chosen, it may be perfect if it fits some users' needs. So, for example, if you have an existing cloud provider that you want to continue to use, they don't offer Trust No One encryption, but they do file syncing, then Cryptomator, I mean, it's a very nice piece of work. I watched the early release and introduction videos by the authors, European authors. It looks, I mean, they did a very nice job, and it is cross-platform, supports everything. So maybe something to consider. Paul Comfort tweeted from @PCCOMF. He said, "Hi, Steve. I listened to your recent sync episode and felt your pain." He said, "I've done a lot of sync testing, and I have used or tested most major platforms, both with my own storage and using cloud storage. I wanted to make you aware of a TNO solution I've found that meet my various needs best, and I think might also do the same for you. Sync.com. He says, I recommend the business solo plan, which is similar in pricing to Dropbox. And actually, it's better than Dropbox. He says, any TNO solution is going to have inherent limitations to what they can do simply because they can't see your data. It's going to make them less feature-full than Dropbox or OneDrive, for example. But Sync.com makes the most of what it can do and provides enough features for me. They still allow web access through an in-browser local decryption, similar to what LastPass does. He says, I currently sync over 100,000 files with them across several systems, both Mac OS and Windows. He says, during my testing, that number of files gave both Syncthing and SpiderOak trouble. I make use of their archive function /location for things I never want synced. I make use of their selective sync for systems that don't need my entire file structure. The one Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive-like feature I wish it had would be on-demand sync, so that my smaller systems with smaller drives can still display the entire tree, but only download items when I need them. But selective sync makes up for that. He says, I just need to be smarter about what I sync. I also have a system connected to a Drobo that synchronizes everything to the Drobo, so I can take a full personal backup of all the online data in case something happens to them. He says, I'm not affiliated with them at all, except as a customer. Even though this message probably sounds like an advertisement, well, believe me, it's compared to what I'm about to do with this podcast. He says, I'm a satisfied user, and I think it would meet your requirements better than any other solution you mentioned.
I've seen a lot of that from sync.com. You know, it's the price is $10 a month for 3 terabytes.
3 terabytes.
So I pay $99 a year. That's compared to $120 a year for 2 terabytes on Google Drive. So that I think is a very good price if you have that much storage.
I tweeted back to Paul and I let him know that yes, indeed, sync.com, for many of the reasons he noted, was one of the 2 tools I had settled upon after looking at everything.
My negative on it, no Linux. Now don't they say they're going to do Linux?
Yes, that is that you hit it. That is the one downside that will affect some of our listeners. They do, however, have it on their roadmap. Yeah. So they are intending to do Linux, and I ended up with a kind of an interesting workaround using a Raspberry Pi that I will explain.
Clever.
And I also should note that I have it running on my Drobos. And that there's a Synology client for it also.
Oh, that's good. I use Synology. I mean, I basically do this with a Synology.
Right.
So I have my own cloud.
So I looked at Own Cloud, which is what I was talking about when you and I first reached this topic a couple months ago. I looked at Nextcloud. I saw what you were talking about the
schism.
Basically the originator of Own Cloud was annoyed that they were beginning to also offer some paid only, like, super cloud sorts of things. And he said, I really don't want to do that. So he forked the source. And I mean, looking at them side by side, there's no difference between them. I mean, they're like they are identical in every meaningful way. So I don't know what the Own Cloud people have been, doing, but they sure haven't changed the UI at all that I was able to see. Of course, as I mentioned, I looked at Cryptomator. There's something called encrypted file system, CRYFS.org. There's also Syncovery. There's Duplicati. There's duplicity. I don't want to say duplicity. Duplicacy. Thank you. Duplicacy. There's Tesseract, there's pCloud, there's something AJC Sync. We talked in between my first mention and now about that clever idea of using VeraCrypt, that is mounting a VeraCrypt expandable volume, for example, in Dropbox, because Dropbox is clever about only sending changed blocks, and so it would make sense to mount a VeraCrypt volume, because we know VeraCrypt's crypto has been looked at and scrutinized, and it's been audited and all that. And so the idea would be when you're working in a file system and changing files, a file system is only changing clusters. And so if the blocks were like clusters, it would make sense. I mean, you could see how that would be efficient to do in a mode where only the things that are being changed in a big volume would be resynced. It would never work in an environment where changing part of a file meant the whole file was resent, because then if you touched anything in the VeraCrypt volume, it would send your entire volume back up to the cloud provider. So that would not work. But I ended up being very bullish on sync.com. As you noted, Leo, you get a lot more storage for the money. Dropbox gives you, for our listeners who want to play with this, Dropbox gives you 2 gig for free. Sync gives you 5 gig for free. So even just paying nothing, setting up a free plan, you get 5 gig. And in fact, there is an affiliate link which you can use to add an additional 20 if you've got friends. I tweeted my affiliate link when I was discovering them. I found out that it is capped at an additional 20 gig. I thought with my Twitter followers, and people who use the link also get a free gig for using the link. So they start out with 6 rather than 5 for free. I ended up with 25 because I got the 5 plus the 20 gig from people following my affiliate link. And I told everybody, I said, well, this is an affiliate link. We each get a free gig. So let's do that. And that's how I found that it was capped. But they have if someone wants to pay less, they have a $4 per month plan. They call it a personal plan, which is 500 gig, so half a terabyte. So that would be $48 a year. But the bargain, I think, is what they call, and this is what was it Steve who tweeted? No, Paul who tweeted about the so-called the solo business. They have 2 terabyte for $8 a month, whereas Dropbox charges $10 a month for 2 terabyte. But for that same $10 a month from Sync, you can get 3 terabytes. And that's 3 terabytes. That's
even
a lot.
2 for most people is probably more than you need.
Yes. Well, yes,
1 is probably more than you need because you have to upload it.
Yes. And for what I'm using it for is cross-system synchronization of just subsets of my data. So let me talk a little bit more about what Sync is and to introduce it to our listeners. So basically, you can think of it as Dropbox without all the other bells and whistles. So it's just cloud storage, but they did solve the TNO problem perfectly. So there are clients for Windows and Mac, notably not yet for Linux. So that still needs to get resolved. And you and I, Leo, were also talking about the fact that where Dropbox creates its own Dropbox folder, Sync does the same thing. And so that chafed a little bit because, for example, I wanted my ASM tree. I have an ASM for assembly language on the root of my C drive, and I wanted that to be synchronized rather than like stuff in the Sync folder. I found a beautiful solution. That involves junction points on NTF volumes, also known as hard links. The idea being that you move the folder from your normal folder hierarchy under the Sync directory. And so in my case, I have moved my ASM folder. I just dragged it under the Sync directory, and that was instant. And then Sync, of course, went about doing its synchronization to the cloud. And remember, these are my crown jewels. This is all of this. This is like the spin right source and everything is now synced with Sync in the cloud. Then Windows has a command mklink, make link. And you use the /J for creating a junction point. And basically, you create a junction point at the \asm with the pointing it to the asem folder under the sync directory, and it just reappears. It's, for me, my asem folder is back under C:, where I like it, where all of my tools expected to be, where all of my batch files and scripts and everything expected to be. Under a command window, I can go to, C:\asem. So there's like in no way is it different from as if it had never been moved.
Is it
yet
like a hard link in Linux or like a symbolic link? It's like a hard link.
Yes, the symbolic link is not what you want because those are kind of flaky and it's sort of a pointer. It is like Linux's hard link, and it is, in fact, a hard link in Windows cannot be a directory. It's only a file. So this is like a directory level hard link.
Yeah, you can do symbolic links to folders in Linux.
Folders.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so this solves that problem for me in Windows without any duplication. So there, it's not like I have two asems now. It's just that I moved my asem folder under the sync directory and then pointed to it from its original location, and it works. Absolutely the same. I've been using it now for a month or so, and I've never seen it, not do the right thing.
Interesting.
So let's see. I'm just going to scroll through here. Protect your IDs, your ideas. I've looked at this stuff. I've looked at their technology. It's bulletproof. So, for example, because they get it that their competitive advantage is not only price but privacy. So they note that Google Drives, the Google Terms of Service, gives their automated systems permission to access the data stored on their servers for the purpose of monetization through advertising. The Dropbox Terms of Service gives Dropbox employees and trusted, quote, third parties, whoever they may be, permission to access, view, and share the files stored on their servers at any time. The Box Terms of Service gives Box permission to view the files stored on their servers to ensure users are in compliance with Box Terms of Service. And Microsoft OneDrive Terms of Service gives Microsoft employees permission to view the files stored on their servers to ensure users are in compliance with Microsoft Terms of Service. So obviously I'm not putting my crown jewels with any of those guys without providing encryption. And again, Cryptomator would be what you would use if you needed to use one or more of those services. For me, Sync has it nailed. So under features, it's 100% private cloud, end-to-end encryption. They wrote, protects your confidential data in cloud from unauthorized access at all times. We can't read your files and no one else can either. Sync doesn't collect, sell, or share your personal data or app usage information to advertisers or third parties, and we do not claim ownership of your data. They said under global data privacy compliance, Sync is safe to use no matter where your business operates, within the USA, the EU, UK, GDPR, and Canadian compliance built in. Oh, they are a Canadian company, by the way. And they said including Canadian data residency. Backs up your files in real time and makes it easy to recover deleted files and previous versions of any file anytime. Never lose a file again. That's another one of the things that is in my criteria. We've talked a lot about the danger of ransomware. So the way you resolve that is you use a system that does file versioning, and this does that. And I feel almost guilty because I'm a person who's hitting Control S all the time to save to take snapshots and save things I'm working on. And when I look in my Sync history, it just like scrolls off forever. It's like, oh my goodness, I hope they're doing, maybe they're doing something smart about eliminating redundancy. But the problem is we're doing client-side encryption, so they're not able to see, they're not able to decompose this the way, for example, Dropbox is in order to do more intelligent synchronization. But I do have versioning on all of these files. They said data is replicated across multiple SSAE 16 Type 2 certified data center locations with SAS RAID storage, automatic failover, and the 99.9% or better uptime SLA, service level agreement. For account security, two-factor authentication, granular user permissions, remote wipe, custom passwords, expiration dates, notification, and more ensure you're always in control. And Leo, the thing that I saw that immediately made me think, okay, I'm with the right guys now, is when I was setting up my account and created a username and password and sent that in, I got a dialog prompt that said use email for password recovery, and it was not checked
Good.
by default.
Good.
And I thought, whoa, when have you ever seen that? I mean, so they're like, by default, you're not using email for password recovery because, of course, as we know, that's the weakest link in password handling. So, in fact, in my Squirrel presentation, I joke with people that I've run across people who don't even bother to write passwords down. They said, no, I just gave up on that a couple years ago. I just click, I forgot my password.
Every single time?
Every single time.
And then, of course, it gets emailed. But it's a reset, usually, that's not totally insecure, right? A reset link. Of course, anybody can get that.
Totally.
Yeah, because anybody who got it,
Exactly. So I mean, it just makes you cringe, but okay. I mean, so here, that's what we've done. The point I make during my Squirrel presentation is we have we IT internet techie world have so abused the common man, the typical user, that they're just like, okay. I give up. I'm just going to say, no, I don't. It's true. I don't remember because I never wrote it down. I just click the I forgot and I get it. And look, I'm logged in. Huh. So they say under their technical overview, it's zero knowledge end-to-end encryption. File and file metadata is encrypted client-side and remains encrypted in transit and at rest. There is a web panel. File sharing and share collaboration features are also zero knowledge. Private encryption keys are only accessible by the user, never by sync. Passwords are never transmitted or stored and are only ever known by the user. So we get some juicy crypto details. A randomly generated 2048-bit RSA private encryption key serves as the basis for all encryption at sync. During account creation, that unique private key is generated on the user's machine and encrypted with 256-bit AES GCM, which coincidentally is what I use to encrypt Squirrel's identities in the Squirrel system. So same bulletproof encryption, and that is locked with a user's password, which also is what I do. This takes place client-side within the web browser or app. PBKDF2 key stretching with a high iteration count is used to help make weak passwords more cryptographically secure. Encrypted private keys are stored on Sync's servers and downloaded and decrypted locally by the desktop app, web panel, or mobile apps after successful authentication. At no time does Sync have access to a user's private key. A username and password is required to authenticate and log into the Sync desktop app, the Sync web panel, and Sync's mobile apps. Oh, and there's another cool thing that happens, Leo. When you have the Sync app running on your desktop and It has a minimal UI, so it will launch your web browser. It then authenticates with your desktop app in order to get it self-authenticated, so you don't have to, like re-log into the web browser. It automatically does a single sign-on behind the scenes with the desktop app. They said during authentication, a bcrypt hash of the user inputted password is generated locally, bcrypt being a hard to accelerate solution, locally on the computer or device using a unique salt that is stored on the server. Bcrypt, they remind us, is a one-way hashing mechanism, meaning the hash cannot be unhashed or deciphered. The benefit of bcrypt is that it is slow by design, which prevents brute force or rainbow table attacks. At no time is and remember, it's every single user gets a unique salt, which the server holds, so that you're able to operate across platforms. The server authenticates against the hash, but at no time is the hash itself stored. Successful authentication allows the app to download the user's encrypted private key, which is then decrypted locally with the user's actual password. In other words, they have done everything right from a crypto standpoint. They say Sync's web panel runs on the client within the web browser as a self-contained AngularJS app. The web panel utilizes Stanford JavaScript crypto library, which, by the way, is the right one, a JavaScript implementation of Isaac, which is a fast cryptographic random number generator, so they're not trusting the one built into JavaScript, and HTML5 local storage. This means only modern web browsers are supported. In other words, IE10 is the minimum requirement. The web panel, which of course is no problem. The web panel authenticates the user, downloads the encrypted encryption keys, decrypts the keys locally within the web browser, then downloads and decrypts file and file metadata as required. And so short version is your web browser is a very nice UI, presents a nice UI that gives you access to everything that is there as if it wasn't encrypted, but it is. Passwords are never transmitted or stored during this process. The web panel is open source. Source code is easily viewable from any web browser for those technically inclined to see how it works. File data is always encrypted in transit and at rest. Sync utilizes a unique 256-bit AES GCM data key on each file, locked with the user's 2048-bit RSA key. File metadata is encrypted separately with the user's password, PBKDF2, key stretched to generate a key for the 256-bit AES GCM. This all happens locally on the user's computer or device before the files are transferred to Sync's servers. This ensures that the encrypted file data stored on Sync's servers is impossible to access, even in the event that the servers themselves are compromised. And they've solved the problem of users. One of the requests I got from our listeners is, I'd like to store things encrypted in the cloud, but I also want to be able to share specific files with people, like give somebody a link that they're able to use. They explain, secure links are locked with a unique password appended to the link after the hashtag. That's very clever, because what's after the hashtag, the #, is never transmitted. The data appended to our URL after the hashtag is called a fragment identifier, which is never transmitted or stored, meaning the password is never known to Sync. The password itself is key stretched using PBKDF2 with a high iteration count to generate the encryption key used to unlock the link. So that's a link that an individual can generate and share with a friend, and then tell them what the password is. When they use the link, they'll be prompted for the password, put that in, and then that file will be, after the information provided is verified, be downloaded and decrypted locally for that user to gain access to. So again, they've solved the link sharing, the specific file sharing problem, and maintained TNO encryption. Then they also provide a shared folders facility. Shared folders utilize key wrapping, which is multi-keying basically, to allow files to be shared between different sync users privately without the need to re-encrypt the actual file data when users are added and removed from the share. Sync never has access to file data, even when being shared. When a new share folder is created, the unique encryption key on each file within the share is encrypted with a unique 512-bit share key that is created specifically for the share. The share key is then encrypted with the RSA 2048-bit public key of each user and locked with the user's RSA private key, which is encrypted with the user's password. So in other words, they do, again, exactly the right thing. They meta encrypt the share under a 512-bit key, which is then multiply encrypted under all of the people who are sharing that folder, multiply encrypted under all of their public keys, which means that any one of them are able to decrypt that 512-bit key with their private key. And so, again, create basically a network of truly encrypted shared folders where you get to use sync to create the cloud-based infrastructure for sharing folders among multiple sync users, and the whole process is transparent. Basically, you end up with a folder on your system that you are securely sharing among other sync users. They've just nailed this. Single sign-on, and here they mention what I was saying before. The Sync desktop app allows the user to log into the web panel automatically. The web panel is loaded locally using a unique URL that contains a memcache lookup value, and here they're getting into the details of how the mem panel works. I'll skip all that. And they note that Sync uses SSL and TLS for all data transfers, but does not rely on SSL or TLS for any meaningful security. They say, as SSL on its own cannot be trusted. SSL is applied as an extra layer on top of the 2048-bit RSA and 256-bit AES encryption used to encrypt each file. This ensures that in the event that SSL is compromised, for example, a man-in-the-middle attack or an SSL software vulnerability, of course, we're talking about, certificate authorities being compromised or middle boxes that are performing on-the-fly decryption of SSL. None of that affects the security of this system. It remains encrypted inside that tunnel and thus impossible to access. So anyway, I mentioned how I had solved the problem of things needing to be in the sync folder by using the junction point or a directory junction, actually, /J in the make link command for Windows. So I am super happy with it. For me, it's the right cost, the right technology. These guys nailed it. Somehow I like the idea of the things I absolutely really care about, never losing access to, and also, of course, I have access now on the road. So all of these things are available while I'm traveling just by tying into a publicly available cloud provider. without sacrificing any security. So that is one of the two things I have found. And Leah, let's take our last break, and then I will tell everybody about the second really cool tool.
Thing 2. Boy, if this only had a Linux solution, I wonder how close they are to solving that, because that really would, then I would, see right now I'm doing it all to a Synology, but with 3 terabytes, I mean, because I use a Synology basically as a backup tool, but then I also have a documents folder, which is the stuff I want on every machine. It's about 20 gigs. It's not that big. I use a Git for my source code, which I'm always amazed that you don't use version control of any kind in your source code, but to each his own. And I use an encrypted Git, which I like a lot. But I could also, I could do this too. And I think probably I could get even like my music and photos backup. I think those are each about 1 terabyte. I could get it all into 3 terabytes. And it would have the advantage of it would be off-site. My Synology's in the house.
That is exactly it. Is that just having it somewhere else? I mean, I have servers at level 3, so I could run.
You could do this.
Yeah, although I'm so security conscious that having my server at level 3 that has a public port.
Yeah.
It just makes me uncomfortable that there isn't going to be some buffer overrun or buffer overflow. And so here it's not, it's somewhere else.
It is public. I mean, that is accessible by the internet.
Yeah, well, so yes, but it's not my server that it would be exposed. Right. It's their server that would be exposed.
And your data on there is encrypted.
And my data in there cannot be accessed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you may have convinced me that this would be and as you said, there's a Synology app, so I could easily use my Synology too. That's interesting. I just wish there was a Linux. All right. Let's take a little break. We've got a great sponsor. They deserve some time, and then we'll get back to the final part of this very important story. Steve, did I mention it? Last chance. I haven't checked. Our event is tomorrow. No, day after tomorrow, right? Thursday. I haven't checked if it's sold out, but there is a way you can find out. Our LastPass event is coming up Thursday, Boston, the Intercontinental Hotel. If you're going to be in Boston Thursday afternoon, go to twit.to. That's our URL shortener, twit.to/unlocked. Sign up. Maybe there's an extra ticket. Maybe somebody isn't going to go and said, hey, you can give my ticket away. I would love to see you. Steve and I will be there a day after tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. Bill Cheswick, the guy who invented the firewall, and a guy who has said for years passwords just don't work. We're going to be talking about authentication. We'll be joined by a CISO, LogMeIn CISO Jerry Bookhout will be there as well. So there's really going to be a high-level discussion about what authentication is, why we need it, why it doesn't work right now, and what steps can be taken to make it work better, including, of course, Steve will talk about Squirrel. twit.to/LastPass. Thank you, LastPass, for inviting us out. It's going to be a lot of fun. Meanwhile, if you're not using LastPass, what? You listen to Security Now and you don't use LastPass? Are you insane? LastPass is the password vault, the manager. It generates good, long, strong passwords, then encrypts them and stores them in a vault so you don't have to remember them. You just remember your master password, and LastPass takes care of the rest. That vault is so strong, so encrypted, it is only decrypted on device. The good news is LastPass works everywhere. Linux, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android. They have plugins for every single browser out there. So you can always get autofill. You're on iOS, you say, what? You're signing up for an app. You can generate a password. Next time you just press the LastPass button, it'll autofill it. Same thing on Android. Same thing in your browser. That is so convenient. And it really encourages you to do good password hygiene, right? Because you're not, saying monkey123 or your aunt's maiden name and your birth date as your password. You're getting the most perfect passwords. LastPass does everything right. Steve knows. He actually audited their software some time ago when Joe Segrist invited him to take a look at the code. They use PBKDF2 to make it harder to brute force the password on your vault. I think 100,000 iterations now. They keep upping it. It was 5,000. I think it's like you can set it to your own. If you want to make it 1 million, go ahead. But the derivative password function means brute forcing virtually impossible. It would take a lot more work to do it. It's things like that. The other thing I love about LastPass is LastPass Enterprise. We use it here. Every business should be using it because, after all, you can have great password hygiene at home for yourself. You can use LastPass, but if you're not using it at work, what are your employees doing? Are they writing it down, putting it on a Post-it note? I hope not. With LastPass Enterprise, they don't even get access to the password. You can share passwords. You can let them log into the bank account and the QuickBooks and the website and the database and all that stuff, but they don't get access, which means they can't give it away, share it, bring it with them when they leave, that kind of thing. LastPass has great auditing procedures for your IT department. A great dashboard lets them know exactly what's going on. And they are always improving it. In fact, they just set up an expanded business lineup with some really amazing features that they're going to do two things normally mutually exclusive. They're both going to improve your security and make it easier for your employees. That's normally, it's either security or convenience. You can't have both. But in this case, LastPass has come up with some great ideas. I'll give you an example. LastPass Enterprise now includes single sign-on, SAML, for 1,200 plus apps. That means if that app is supported, they don't even need a password. They use their phone to log in, single sign-on. It makes it so easy, and yet it's more secure. Your employees will love it. They'll use it. That's really important, and you'll be more secure. They're also doing something they call LastPass MFA, multi-factor authentication, which leverages things like biometrics, fingerprint, Face ID, and contextual factors, location. We're going to talk about this on the event on Thursday. This is really the future of authentication. It just these extra data points really let LastPass know you are who you say you are. That's important. They call it LastPass Identity, a combination of the new LastPass Enterprise and LastPass MFA. From single sign-on, password management to adaptive authentication, LastPass gives your IT department granular control and gives your users frictionless access. It's a win-win. You will love it. I store everything in LastPass. I trust it for my passports, not just passwords, passports, driver's license, social security numbers. It's all in that vault. It's all safe, and and I can get it on every single device. I love LastPass. You're going to love it too. Have you done the LastPass Security Challenge? You got to do that. I do that every month or so. It goes through all your passwords, shows you where you need to make changes to improve your security, and even automates that process. So you just push a button and it'll change the passwords. It scans them, looks at their length, uniqueness, strength. You get an overall score. You see detailed results for all your accounts. You'll know what passwords are putting you at risk. You'll know what you need to do to fix them. It'll even help you fix them. Man, make your users do this. It is so important. From authentication to access to passwords, LastPass manages every entry point to your business so you can mitigate risk and improve employee productivity. I love them. You will too. LastPass.com/twit to find out how they can help your business. LastPass.com/twit. And folks, don't forget, last chance. We're not going to mention it again. I'm getting on an airplane. Steve is already on an airplane, I think, as we do this. And we will see you in Boston, October 3rd, 345 Intercontinental Hotel. You must have a ticket to get in. And if they've not sold out yet, there's a chance. Go to twit.to/unlocked. All right, Steve, thank you. Back to the show. Steve Gibson, Leo Laporte. The joy of sync continues.
Now, I just gave everybody my absolute first choice of a service that did everything right. There is another incredibly cool tool, which, Leo, you will be glad to know does support Linux and has iOS and Android apps, and is also just, it is addictive, seductive. It is done so well. A number of people have recommended it. I looked at it, and it just in terms of their philosophy and what they've done, it's so cool.
Now
And that's called.
You've got me excited.
It's called Syncthing.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, it is. So Syncthing is a peer-to-peer solution. So, and it is what I have running on both Drobos. I had, and also on my workstations. What I'm now thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to use sync.com as my glue between my locations and Syncthing as my LAN level sync, although it is not constrained to that. So what is it? It is an open source, open protocol. You can think of it, if you wanted to think of it, like something like BitTorrent, which is now Resilio.
Yeah.
Yes,
And not
of course,
free.
and not free, and not open.
And not open.
So
I love that the Syncthing is, which is really great.
Yes,
Yeah.
and open protocol, open source, and their heart is in the right place. So the project's formally stated goals are: Syncthing should be 1, safe from data loss. They said protecting the user's data is paramount. We take every reasonable precaution to avoid corrupting the user's files. This is the overriding goal, without which synchronizing files becomes pointless. This means that we do not make unsafe trade-offs for the sake of performance or, in some cases, even usability. And I should note that it's written in Go, so it outperforms other solutions that are written in PHP, like OwnCloud or what's the other one? OwnCloud or
Nextcloud.
Nextcloud, yes. Yeah. Secure against attackers, they say. Again, protecting the user's data is paramount. Regardless of our other goals, we must never allow the user's data to be susceptible to eavesdropping or modification by unauthorized parties. This should be understood in context. It is not necessarily reasonable to expect Syncthing to be resistant against well-equipped state-level attackers. We will, however, do our best. Note also that this is different from anonymity, which is not currently a goal. And I'll explain what that's about. Ease of use. Syncthing should be approachable, understandable, and inclusive. Complex concepts and math form the basis of Syncthing's functionality. This should nonetheless be abstracted or hidden to a degree where Syncthing is usable by the general public. Certainly by our listeners. There's no question about that.
I admit I have installed Syncthing and having a little trouble figuring out how to get it syncing.
I did too.
Good.
I didn't initially understand the model.
Yeah,
now I've nailed it.
And maybe
now.
because I was thinking of it as a BitTorrent sync client, kind of like,
yes,
and that made it hard to understand. Yeah.
Yes, because one of the things that's noted is that BitTorrent is sort of more automagic than this is. Whereas, but here you get control. And now that I understand what it's doing, I really like that control. So our listeners should know there's a little bit of a learning curve, but just take it easy and you'll get there. So then they said it should also be automatic. User interaction should be required only when absolutely necessary. Specifically, this means that changes to files are picked up without prompting, conflicts are resolved without prompting, and connections are maintained without prompting. We only prompt the user when it is required to fulfill one of the overriding secure, safe, or easy-to-use goals. Also, universally available. Syncthing, they say, should run on every common computer. We are mindful that the latest technology is not always available to any given individual. Computers, including desktops, laptops, servers, virtual machines, general-purpose computers such as Raspberry Pis, and, where possible, tablets and phones, NAS appliances, toasters, cars, firearms, thermostats, and so on, may include computing capabilities, but it is not our goal for Syncthing to run smoothly on these devices. So maybe not your toaster or your shotgun, but things where it's reasonable for it to run. And they said, for individuals, Syncthing is primarily about empowering the individual user with safe, secure, and easy-to-use file synchronization. We acknowledge that it's also useful in an enterprise setting and include functionality to support that. If this is in conflict with the requirements of the individual, those will, however, take priority. And then they said everything else. There are many things we care about that don't make it onto the list. It's fine to optimize for these values as well, as long as they're not in conflict with the stated goals above. For example, performance is a thing we care about. We just don't care more about it than safety, security, etc. Maintainability of the code base and providing entertainment value for the maintainers are also things that matter. It is understood that there are aspects of Syncthing that are suboptimal or even in opposition with the goals above. However, we continually strive to align Syncthing more and more with those goals. So I am 100% sold on this Syncthing, now that I understand it. My original setup, I was really interested to know whether a Syncthing instance at one of my locations would be able to connect to my Syncthing at the other, because where in my place with Lori, I'm not behind one NAT, I'm behind two NATs, because I ended up putting I ended up putting a pfSense router in front of my Asus Wi-Fi router.
Nice.
So they're both natting. So there's double NAT there. And of course, here I'm in the fortress of solitude. I mean, I am really locked down. They instantly found each other, and I had no relay required. So to explain a little bit about this architecture, it is peer-to-peer. There are a network of global discovery servers and relay servers out on the public internet, so that an instance of Syncthing is able to use the discovery servers to get the IP and port that another instance of Syncthing has a public appearance on. And so they solve using stun and turn that we talked about a long time ago, NAT piercing. My Syncthing clients, each running behind all of that natting, are able to connect directly to each other across the public internet with no relays. So nobody sees my traffic except anybody in a direct connect. And actually, since both locations are on Cox.net, it doesn't even leave Cox Cable's infrastructure. I set up a 5-node Syncthing peer-to-peer network. Both Drobos had Syncthing running. They found each other, so they created a synchronized folder hierarchy there. Then I was running on my workstation at the other end, found the local Drobo. Syncthing is able to use the public discovery servers if it needs to find a Syncthing instance elsewhere on the public internet, but on the LAN, it uses broadcast or multicast because it supports IPv6. So it'll use a LAN broadcast or an IPv6 multicast in order to find other instances of Syncthing on your own LAN. So again, what I will end up doing is using Syncthing on my LAN on each of the LANs, but because I like sync.com so much, I will use it to perform my interlocation straddle, and also because sync.com gives me roaming access to everything that I am syncing in my locations with full TNO encryption. Syncthing does not encrypt. The argument being, I mean, its connections are encrypting, but it's not itself a storage provider. It is a synchronizing interconnector. It works on a directory basis. So it works in a headless fashion. There is for Windows users, what I would recommend is something called Synctrezor, as in the Windows tray. So it's called Synctrezor. If you just run Synctrezor under Windows, it includes Sync with it. The version of Sync is out of date, but the first thing Syncthing does is check for any updates and immediately updates itself. The version, for example, that I found that I was able to install on my Drobo was older. Again, first thing it did was perform an in-place upgrade to the latest and greatest. So using a browser UI, you decide which folders on your local machine you want to sync, and with which other instances of Syncthing you want to sync them. There are two weird-looking crypto tokens. One is really long, and that's the Syncthing instance identifier. When you install Syncthing, it synthesizes on the fly a TLS certificate for itself. So each Syncthing instance has a private and public key in the form of a formal TLS certificate. That identifier is a hash, an SHA-256 hash of the certificate, which is base 32 encoded with some check characters added to create that identifier. So the beauty of that is each instance has a unique identifier, which is the hash of its certificate. So and this is where you were talking about how it's not quite so automatic, is it is necessary to provide that thing to the other side in order for Syncthing for instances of Syncthing to find each other. On the LAN, that's not necessary. Well, what I find it's a little jarring actually is that, I'll bring up an instance of Syncthing and it'll say, hey, who do you want to share this with? How about this guy? It's like, oh, yeah, that's the one I wanted to share it with. So on the LAN, it's convenient. Yeah. On the LAN, it's able to do discovery, and you're not having to it's like a really long thing. I mean, it's not unwieldy. You could read it over the phone, but I just stuck it on a thumb drive when I went to my other location and put it in. And once remotely located instances have connected, then they all share all of the Syncthings that they know about with each other. So, I mean, it really does form a Syncthing hub or cloud or network. Syncthing does updates on a block level. It uses 128K blocks by default. Remember that the tweet that I read before about someone who had found that Syncthing he was having trouble with, they've addressed that since then by now supporting much larger instances of things that are being synced. So initially when you set up, there's like a startup process because it hashes all the files that you're wanting to sync, and then it's able to track changes. And I found that it immediately spots a change that I've made. I think there's a deliberate 10-second delay, but after 10 seconds, it finds it and it clones it. And because I was curious in my early experimenting phases, and because this isn't about cloud storage, it is point-to-point device synchronization, I wanted to see whether I could create a cloud presence of my Syncthing synchronization. And so I got a $35 Raspberry Pi, and I used rclone and mount to mount my Dropbox account. This is before I was playing with sync.com. So I mounted my Dropbox account on the Raspberry Pi running Linux, and then ran Syncthing because Syncthing is able to sync a mounted drive. I use Syncthing to sync with my own LAN directory syncs, and it worked perfectly. It isn't something I would recommend on a Raspberry Pi because and this is an rclone problem. In order for rclone to work reliably, it has to make a full copy of the file that it is going to be syncing to remotely or mounted to. And so that's going to, Raspberry Pi runs typically on a little SD card, and those things do not have the resilience to handle, me hitting Control S every 30 seconds while I'm saving copies of things. It would chew up that little SD card and cause it to die. But what you could do if you really wanted to do this would be just to get, any older PC and just set it up with Linux, and then run Syncthing on it, and then also mount a Dropbox or even a sync.com drive and have Syncthing sync to that. Anyway, they've nailed the way this thing works. I mentioned that there were two different crypto things. The other thing is that folders are identified by a unique string to be known to the system that is like network wide, but then you decide which local folder you want that to be synced to. So I think that our users, our listeners of this podcast, once they get the hang of this, will love Syncthing and the power it gives them for what it is. It does take, there's a learning curve. This is not for, non-technical users, but for technical users, because it is, the philosophy is right. It is very fast block level synchronization between devices. It runs on anything. There are iOS and I think there are iOS and Android clients. I have to there is Syncthing for FreeBSD, so I was happy to see that in the Freshports collection. I don't know in my notes here whether, I don't remember now where it is with mobile apps, but anything that runs, it's you don't have access to a browser. I think there are mobile clients, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it does solve the Linux syncing problem, and Mac and Windows, and I'm annoyed that I didn't have in my notes here whether it does. Let's see. Syncthing. Not iOS, but yes to Android. That's what it was. There was something called F-Sync that was an older version of something on iOS, no longer supported. So we do not have Syncthing does not currently have an iOS client, but it does have an app in the Google Play Store and also F-Droid. You're able to grab it there. There's a Mac, Windows, Linux, cross-platform. It's got GUI wrappers using Syncthing GTK, and there is a Syncthing for Mac OS. So FreeBSD, NetBSD, Dragonfly, Solaris, OpenBSD, Windows. The source code is there. It is terrific for inter-device sync. And it is, if I had not discovered sync.com, Syncthing is what I would be using. Oh, I forgot to mention, I feel a little queasy about using public discovery servers. You are able to run your own discovery server. So if you have any sort of a hosted presence on the net, you can run your own discovery server and point your Syncthing instances at it in order to allow them to find each other if you're roaming around. You are also able, if for example endpoints have dying DNS or relatively static IPs, you're also able to just simply point these things at each other across the public internet. But as I said, having found sync.com for the price, and remember, 5 gigs just to play with for free, that's what I'm using for my public presence, trust no one synchronization, and then Syncthing is what I'm using. Oh, and also it handles deep versioning. So for example, I don't do versioning on my workstation instances of Syncthing, but I have versioning turned on the Drobos. So that's perfect. That's what you want, is all the things I'm doing are automatically being synchronizing to the Drobo. So it's got, deep RAID backup and very sophisticated versioning. It's like for the first hour, it keeps a copy every 30 seconds. Then for the next day, it keeps one every hour. Then for the next week, it keeps one every day, and blah, blah. So it's like, a whole hierarchical staged file synchronization. So, which is exactly what you want, so that you're able to go as far back in time as you want to. And all of that is user configurable and tweakable. So anyway, they nailed it for peer-to-peer synchronization across all of our desktop platforms and Android mobile. And sync.com with the only thing it's missing, because it does have apps for iOS and Android. The only thing it's missing, and of course you have a web browser interface as well, is the only thing it's missing is Linux desktop support. So that's my joy of sync.
You did look at pCloud, which
I did look at pCloud,
which has Linux support. If it was like that was a deal breaker, would you consider pCloud, or are there issues with pCloud that you've seen?
I don't remember now.
You looked at a lot of them.
I looked at so many things. I'm at risk of getting them confused.
One thing I do like about it's only 2 terabytes, but they offer a lifetime subscription for $350, and then you can pay for crypto. You can have arbitrarily synced crypto folders, which is nice. So you can encrypt certain folders, but have other folders unencrypted for things like, because they have audio playback, stuff like that, which obviously encrypted folders you couldn't do. And then the other thing I like, you can sync arbitrary folders, so you don't have to do the junction link thing. You can say this folder's synced, this folder's synced, this folder's synced.
That is nice.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they do have a Linux as well as iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows clients.
And pCloud was recommended by some people. So I think I may have been a little put off by the lifetime, only because
you don't have to do that.
Right.
It's the lifetime of pCloud, not of you, obviously.
Correct.
So you don't have to do
Correct.
that. In fact, the pricing is very comparable. It's, I think, $100 a year for 2 terabytes. So it's a little bit less storage. Honestly, though, for most people, 2 terabytes is infinite, as is probably 1 terabyte. Microsoft famously called 1 terabyte infinite on its OneDrive offer. It's really nice that there are these good trust no one choices out there.
Yes, I was gonna say that the world has evolved and matured. I mean, we are, if anything, we are just buried in riches through this whole category.
Yeah. It's very exciting, and I think that I will look at all of these. I think I'll tell you what, I'll give a try to pCloud only because of the Linux client, which really for me is a kind of important because I use Linux as much as anything else.
That does make sense. And when I had tweeted about Sync weeks ago, I did get some listeners say, "Yeah, it looks great, except for Linux."
Yeah.
So
really cool. I think this has been so important. By the way, get the show notes. They're available at grc.com, especially if you're going to set up Syncthing, because Steve does a great job of walking you through that process, better than the documentation, I think. So if you're curious about how to do it, I was a little stymied by it. I've installed it everywhere, but I still haven't hooked it up. But I will be starting to walk through your show notes to get that information. Show notes.
I really
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, show notes are available along with 16 and 64 kilobit audio versions and a full transcript at Steve's site, grc.com. While you're there, he didn't even mention SpinRite. I will. Get yourself a copy of the best file and hard drive recovery and maintenance utility out there. There's only one. It's called SpinRite, and you can get it at grc.com. And since it's Steve's bread and butter, it's how we keep him afloat. So we want to do that. Squirrel information there as well. And if you're going to see one of Steve's presentations in Europe, or our presentation in Boston in a couple of days, you might want to read that first, get an idea of Squirrel. Lots of other great stuff, as always, at grc.com. We have audio and video of every show, and this is one. This is a keeper. This is an evergreen show, and this will be available at twit.tv/SN. That's the Security Now folder. All the shows are there, audio for every show, video for all the shows for which we recorded video, which is several hundred of them, including this one. You can watch us do the shows. Normally, we're a little off today, but normally we do these Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. And if you are around at that time, the stream is live. You can ask your Amazon Echo to listen to Twit Live, or you can do that with your Google Assistant, or you can just go to twit.tv/live and get an audio or video stream. Join us in the chat room if you're doing that, irc.twit.tv. And by all means, subscribe in your favorite podcast application so you can start building your superlative collection of Security Nows. Steve, thanks so much. Great job on this. I think this is going to be a favorite for years to come. See you next time.
Good. I love sharing good solutions with our listeners, and these are really. I really encourage people to look at Syncthing for what it does, and sync.com or pCloud if you need Linux. It makes a lot of sense.
I'll report back. Everything I've seen looks pretty good for pCloud as an alternative. So, Thank you, Steve. We'll see you next time on Security Now.
Thanks, buddy.
Security Now.